what does it mean to own something these days? What I'm starting to realize is that it's basically becoming impossible to own anything, especially here in America. And as I go through this, let me know down in the comments below if you've noticed this. If, we get the impression that we own stuff, but we actually don't. And when I say it's becoming impossible to own anything, I mean pretty much anything. I mean, it's getting very, very bad. And, we get this impression, we get this idea that we do own stuff, that we have ultimate control over all these things, but the way it's looking right now, we don't. We really don't. And if you think back to 2018, there were some people that are self-appointed leaders. I'm not going to say their name, but if you're tuned into this kind of stuff, you're going to know exactly who I'm talking about. But there were some predictions made back in 2018, and those predictions were that in the next 5 years, Americans will own nothing and be happy. And it seems that that has come to fruition. It seems like that's where we're headed, and that's where we're kind of at right now. And I'm speaking on this as somebody who has quite a bit of experience owning things, because everything that is in my life currently, I own outright. My house, for example, is bought and paid for. I have a lake house that is bought and paid for. All my assets, cars, motorcycle, boat, animals, land, all this stuff that I own is bought and paid for. So technically, you would think that I own this stuff. But when you drill this down and you think about what it means to actually own things, I don't own anything. So let's start with my houses. Both are paid off, but does that mean I actually own them? The answer is no, because I have to pay property taxes on those houses every single year. And guess what? If I don't pay property taxes on those homes, somebody will come and they will repossess those homes. My land, same situation. And obviously, if you rent, you definitely don't own the roof over your head. The same is true for all my vehicles. Every single one of them I paid cash for. They've been paid for from day one. But every single year since then, I have paid taxes on that vehicle. And this is especially true if you own a newer car, because something not a lot of people think about is that a lot of these newer cars, they're subscription-based models. All the stuff, all the features in the car, if you want to maintain those things, you have to actually pay a monthly subscription to keep the Wi-Fi on, to unlock your car with your phone, to keep the heated seats, to basically maintain all the features that come along with that car. And in a lot of cases, those features are probably one of the reasons why you bought that car. And that's just the obvious stuff. Let's talk about the things that aren't so obvious. So health, for example. Health is something that we think we own, but do we actually own it? I would say probably not, because our health now is dictated by all the stuff we're exposed to in our daily lives. There are chemicals, there are things in our environment, there are things in our food that is absolutely destroying our health. And it's becoming very, very hard to get away from those things. We are being inundated with these things every single day, and they are in our lives whether we like it or not, and there's really no escape from this stuff at this point. So our health is on borrowed time. But now we also have people resorting to these weight loss drugs, things like Ozempic. And the problem with that is when you put your trust and your reliance into these pharmaceuticals, and that's what you're relying on to maintain a healthy body composition, then you're reliant on that drug. Your health is not yours anymore. It is actually owned by that drug, by that pharmaceutical company. And the fact of the matter is, most Americans are suffering from at least one chronic condition, and most Americans are on pharmaceuticals. So that means that your health is now in the hands of these pharmaceutical companies. And if you get off these drugs, your health reverts back to just as bad as it was before you started these things. So our health, just like everything else, is not really owned by us anymore. We are essentially renting our health one shot and one pill at a time. And that also ties into food, because our health is largely dictated by the things that we put in our body. And do we own our food? I would say the answer to that is a resounding no, because if you think about prior to 1970, over 50% of the population grew and produced our own food. Today, that number is 0.1%. So in other words, we don't really own our food supply. We don't own the food that we eat. If you think about the food that you buy, where do you buy it from? You're probably buying it from the grocery store, from the supermarket. So you are essentially 100% reliant on that grocery store, on that supermarket, and on the people that are producing that food. And in most cases, that food that you buy in the grocery store is going to be very low quality nutrition, because it's mass produced. And especially when it comes to things like vegetables, plants, fruits, and all that stuff, because modern soil has been depleted, and food today contains 90% less nutrition than it did 100 years ago. So if you're buying your food from these big industries, you don't own it. And that is a terrible thing, because what happens if there's a supply chain disruption? What happens if you no longer have access to these grocery stores or this food? We have nothing to fall back on. We can't provide food for ourselves, and there aren't enough small local family-owned farms to provide for everybody. And if you really think about it, the food industry kind of owns us, because we are so reliant on it that if it goes away, we pretty much cease to exist. But that's the way the world works. We are moving towards a subscription-based renter society. Again, you will own nothing and be happy. That's where we're headed, and that's kind of where we're at. And even things like music and television, the internet, we don't own any of these things. They are owned by the providers. We only rent that stuff from them based on a subscription model. The days of owning CDs and DVDs and things like that are kind of going to the wayside, and we are now renting pretty much everything in our lives. There isn't much left that's tangible that you can hold in your hand that you physically own. Even video games and video game consoles. The Nintendo Switch, for example, the new one came out, and there are people that are using it in ways that Nintendo doesn't like. So what do? They brick the console. They shut it down remotely so that you cannot access or use that console. And I'm not even talking about shutting off the online features. I'm talking about actually bricking the console where you can't even use it. And there are a lot of people asking, is that even legal? I guess technically in their eyes it is, because it's their console. They're essentially leasing it to you for a single fee when you buy it, and they're allowing you to use it as long as you use it in a way that they agree with. And diving even deeper, let's talk about things that aren't necessarily tangible. Dating, for example. Do we own our relationships and our social interactions? I would say that we're moving very far away from that stuff, because if you think about dating these days, most of it is done in online dating. It's done on dating apps, and that has caused us to atrophy. Because we're so reliant on these things, most guys are losing the ability to walk up to a woman and attract that woman. As a matter of fact, I read a statistic the other day that said over 3/4 of the younger generation has never approached and talked to a woman out in real life. They rely on social media and they rely on dating apps to conduct all of these social interactions. So if we're totally reliant on these things, we lose that ownership and we pass it off to these applications, to these online programs. And just like with most everything else, a lot of these things are pay to play. You have to pay a monthly membership fee to either use the platform or to unlock all of the features. And that's a terrible thing. Why? Because again, if these applications go away and our ability to do these things has atrophied to the point that we're no longer capable, what are we left with? We're basically left with a society that can't interact, that can't attract women, that can't attract the opposite sex, and that is basically helpless and hopeless. And I believe that is where we're headed. I believe that's kind of where we're at. And just like with everything else we're talking about here, those programs and those applications own us. And to take it a step further and really get into the weeds, let's talk about our kids. If you have kids, do you actually own your kids? That's a great question. And I think that's something we probably need to think very deeply about, because I'm willing to say here, and I'm going out on a limb to say this, let me know in the comments below if you agree or disagree, but I don't believe we own our kids anymore. I believe that the state, the government, probably owns our kids more than we do at this point, because let's break this down. Let's really think about this critically here. If you own a child, you can't really discipline that child like you used to be able to discipline that child back in the 80s and 90s. When I was growing up, I used to get my butt whipped for stepping out of line, for doing things that I wasn't supposed to do. That was discipline. That taught me a lot of lessons that I carry with me today, and that is probably one of the reasons why I have a pretty strong set of morals. But today, if you spank your child, if you whip your child, especially out in public, and somebody sees that, they can lock you up for that. It happens every single day. And that's just one example. Let's talk about education. Do you own your kids' education? I would say largely no, because the way society is set up now, things are very unaffordable. Wages haven't increased. So what has that led to? It's led to both parents having to work. And when both parents have to work, they're not at home to raise, discipline, and teach their child the things that they would like to teach them. So who teaches them? The state, the government, strangers, people you don't know, somebody other than the parents. They're either in daycare or they're in school. And the amount of time that the parents get to spend with the children is very, very minimal. So in that aspect, in that sense, you don't really own your kids' education. You don't own their knowledge, and you don't really own your child fully. And let's talk about divorce. When parents get divorced, it goes through family court. And in most cases, the man ends up becoming a 15% father, and the woman gets custody. At the very most, it's going to be joint custody. 50-50. But because it goes through family court, the family court dictates what kind of custody both parents get. And at that point, do you really own your kids? I would say no, because again, the court, the state, the government, they're dictating all these things about our children. And if you're a terrible parent, the government can come in and they can take away your kids. And when that happens, you definitely don't own your kids, obviously. And not that that's a bad thing, because if you're a terrible person and you shouldn't have kids around you, then you shouldn't have kids around you. And somebody should take these things. But again, this just goes to highlight the fact that we don't really own the things that we think we own. All of this ownership that we think we have, it is very, very misleading. And speaking of thinking, do we own our thoughts? Again, this one is kind of controversial, but I would say that we don't. When you have social media and you have all these narratives that are being fed to us every single day, and you have like the news, the mainstream media, you have all these avenues for them to basically feed us propaganda and feed us these narratives and feed us these agendas, then our thoughts become an inception. They are no longer ours. They are based off the things that are around us, the things that we see, the things that we're exposed to in our daily lives, and all of these things that are being force-fed to us every single day. And in large part, I would say that social media owns our attention for sure, because the average attention span is 2 seconds. All right, that's like shorter than a goldfish. But everything out there, social media, the internet, mainstream media, everything that we're exposed to today is fighting for our attention. It is fighting for our minds. And I would say that because of that, we no longer own our thoughts. We no longer own our minds. And the longer we allow this to go on and the further we allow it to progress, the harder it's going to be to get that back. And if they own our minds, does that mean they also own our lives? Again, let me know in the comments down below if you agree or disagree, but my thoughts on that is that we don't own our lives. We are all here on borrowed time. And that is actually 100% a fact, because we're born into this world. We have a very finite amount of time, and we are essentially leasing this body. We are in this body for a short duration, and then that body is given back to the earth, and our time is up. So maybe we own the time that we're here while we're here, but again, it's on borrowed time. So do we really own our lives? And if we're allowing all of these things around us to dictate our thoughts and to control our lives and to control the way we live our lives, because when you think about social media and all the stuff that we're fed, a lot of us have kind of adopted these ideas and shaped our lives around that. So with that being the case, it's just like the mind thing. Our lives are essentially an inception. They are a quote-unquote simulation of the things that we are exposed to, the things that we see. We mold and shape our lives into something that we believe we should based off societal norms. So in large part, those societal norms and all those things that we're allowing to take precedence over our lives, it owns us. So I would challenge you to come up with one thing that we own outright. Something that no one can take away, no matter what. Something that is not based on a subscription-based model or a renters-based model. Something that is not on borrowed time. Just one thing. Let me know in the comments below if you can come up with that. I've sat down and I've thought about it, and I've had a really hard time coming up with a single thing that we actually own 100% outright while we're here. But what I've found is that it's hard to come up with one thing based on societal norms if we're basing everything on the way we live our lives right now. And that's where I think this gets very interesting, because I think the way to get out of this and the way to actually own more things in your life and have more control over your life is to get back to the basics. Stop participating in this society, in this modern world. All of this subscription-based renters stuff that is being forced into our lives, the fastest way to get away from that and to overcome it is to simply stop participating. Stop buying all these subscription-based services. Stop renting everything that you own, everything in your life. Stop living your life on borrowed time. Stop letting all these things that are around us control and dictate our minds. And to do this, I think it is very, very simple. I think it's a matter of getting back to the basics, getting back to the simpler ways of doing things. Because just like I mentioned with food, back before 1970, over 50% of the population grew and produced our own food. We owned that. We need to get back to that style of doing things, that model that we have abandoned. Because if we can get back to that, then we're no longer reliant on the industrial food complex. And food is just an example. You can relate this to pretty much anything that we've talked about. Spend less time on social media and with your face in your phone, and step foot outdoors, get out in nature, expose yourself to the real world, and that is going to allow you to reclaim your thoughts. There is nothing in nature that is trying to compete for your attention or for your mind. Pay off your debts so that you can gain more ownership on the things that you do have. And granted, like I mentioned, you're not ever going to own anything outright because you still have to pay taxes on your house and all these things. But if that's all you're paying is just taxes, and you don't have to pay a mortgage or subscriptions or renting or any of these things, then that is more of that thing that you do actually own. So while you might not be able to take all of your power back, at least you're taking some of it back. And by freeing up more capital and building more wealth for yourself because you no longer have these payments that you're paying every single month, that in turn should also allow you to reclaim more of your time. And when you reclaim your time, that usually means less stress, which also means more peace, more freedom. And these are things that you can absolutely own. And if you can free yourself up enough financially, and you do have a family, maybe that means that one of the parents can step away from the workforce and can actually stay home with the kids to raise the kids properly, so that you have more ownership and more control over your children, so that you're not so reliant on the state or the government or strangers to raise your kids. And I truly believe that this applies to everything that we've talked about, because when you stop participating and you stop taking part in this consumerism, materialistic, renter, subscription-based society, and all these ideas that we've been fed and that we've largely adopted, then slowly, over time, you start to reclaim your power. You start to take control back. And that in turn allows you to own more of the things in your life. It allows you to own more of your life in general. And I believe that's very, very important, because if we allow these things to continue, then we are 100% going to be in a situation where we own nothing. But are we going to be happy? Personally, I don't think we will. I think a lot of us are very unhappy now because we're headed in that direction. So when we have completely arrived to that point, we are going to be much less happy. We're going to be more lost and more hopeless than we are right now. And I would say that in general, society is going to spiral into a general state of despair. And once we get to that point, once we allow ourselves to get that far, it's going to be really hard to come back from that. Because the more of these models that we adopt and the more ownership we give up, the more there are going to be. The reason these things proliferate and they continue to expand and take over our daily lives is because people continue to buy them. They continue to participate. But as I mentioned, and the entire point to all this is that the quickest way out of this is to stop participating. If nobody bought into this stuff, these things would not exist. They would have never taken hold, and we would never have gotten into this position. So essentially, when you think about it that way, we have actually put ourselves here. We have dug this hole for ourselves. And while that is a bad thing, just always remember that if we're the ones that dug the hole, we hold the power to dig ourselves back out.